Hello, everybody. Can you all see and hear me? Excellent. So, let's see. What do we have to do? First, we have to share my screen. Now, we left off, we didn't quite finish our discussion of the nature of mind, part one. We were actually right around here talking about conceivability arguments for dualism. So, just by way of recap, maybe I'll back up a little bit. So that is in the instructions. Yeah, the word limit for the essay. Um, so we were right here, also in the instructions. Um, so we were talking about the conceivability argument for dualism, which I won't go over in, like great detail because we covered it last time. But basically, this is not an argument that Descartes himself made exactly like this, but it's something that you can sort of read out of what he says in the Meditations. Um, um, Basically, conceivability arguments work as follows. If you can conceive of something, if something is conceivable, then it is logically possible. And if it's logically possible, well, in this case, if it's logically possible that a mind can exist separately from a body, then dualism must be true, physicalism must be false. That's the basic idea. But we can flip this around to illustrate why conceivability arguments don't always work. So we're following Crumley's example in the textbook, which has to do with lightning. Now, lightning is static electricity discharge. It's really big and powerful static electricity discharge, but it's other than that, it's really the same sort of thing that happens when you rub your socks on a carpet and touch a doorknob and get a shock, right? Except on a grander scale. Of course, we understand this now. But ancient peoples, for example, didn't know that lightning was static electricity discharge. They were aware of the sorts of phenomena that we associate with static electricity. The ancient Greeks knew that if you rubbed, um, amber, uh, you could create a sort of charge. They didn't understand it as charge, but um, in fact, the Greek word for amber is electra, which is where our word for electricity comes from. But they didn't know it was electricity. So it's conceivable. Um, Lightning that is not static electricity discharge is conceivable, right? The ancients, maybe in the archaic period in ancient Greece, for example, might have thought of lightning coming from Zeus's thunderbolt, right? That's what it was. It wasn't static electricity discharge. So it's lightning that's not static electricity discharge is conceivable. And of course, if it's conceivable, it's possible. So it's possible for there to be lightning separately from static electricity discharge. And if that's the case, then the lightning as static electricity discharge must be false. Um, but um, we know that lightning is static electricity discharge. It doesn't matter if we can conceive of lightning separately from static electricity discharge. So the conclusion we're led to here is that conceivability arguments are not very compelling. So if we don't buy this argument, right, that it's lightning that's not static electricity discharge is conceivable, therefore it's possible. We shouldn't buy the conceivability argument for dualism either. Okay, that is about where we left off. Any questions? So I know the essay proposal is due this Friday, but um, I've explained all of this. Yeah, it does not include references. This is in my instructions, in the video I gave, and in the instructions on in the template. So I do not. I expect that I should not have to answer any more questions about the proposal today because this has been explained in great detail. Yeah, it's also in all those slides. I mean, if asking me these questions, I'm getting inundated with these questions, which kind of shows me that my instructions are not being paid attention to. And honestly, um, that's kind of insane. Um, you've got to be keeping on top of this stuff. That's why I spent a whole lecture talking about this, so that I don't have to interrupt my lecture to talk about it now. So please make sure you've read all those. I know what you mean, Yusuf. I know you're asking about the argument. It's not you, Yusuf. I'm not trying to single out anybody. It's just that it's just there's a reason I give so many instructions in such detail so that I don't have to interrupt lecture to talk about this. Um, so it's really incumbent upon you to have read all of those. I mean, there's a video, there's slides, there's a template, there's instructions in the course outline. There's no reason. There shouldn't be any unanswered questions. Okay, why doesn't the argument work? Well, Yusuf, let's go back a slide. So remember that what we're doing here is trying to mm, we're trying to see whether conceivability arguments work by looking at another conceivability argument that kind of like obviously doesn't work, right? The conceivability argument for the dualist, the argument for dualism on the conceivability argument is that we can conceive of a mind existing separately from a body, right? Like a soul, or Descartes' case, res cogitans, some non-physical substance, an entirely different kind of substance from res extensa, which is the extended substance of the body and bodies in general. And if we can conceive of something like that, then it's conceivable. And if it's conceivable, then it's logically possible. It doesn't mean that it's physically possible, but that it's logically possible. And we'll skip a few of these premises, but um, the basic idea is if it's conceivable for a mind to exist separately from a body, then it's possible. And if it's logically possible, then physicalism is false. So we reject physicalism, the theory that says the mind is physical, and we opt for dualism. But what this argument does is it says, well, look, we know that lightning is static electricity discharge. Sure, we can conceive of lightning that's not static electricity discharge, like Zeus's thunderbolt or I don't know, Emperor Palpatine's force lightning or something, right? Um, but we wouldn't then say that, oh, it's possible. Um, it's conceivable, so it's possible. Therefore, the lightning as static electricity discharge is false on that basis. We know it's true. Um, so this is trying to show that conceivability arguments really aren't all that compelling. Does that make sense? Perfect. Yeah, conceivability arguments are tricky. But this, I think, illustrates why they're tricky. Okay, now we're going to talk more about uh, some of the problems with dualism, namely um, the mind-body interaction. So you might ask, if the mind is non-physical, like the dualists say, and the body is physical, then how on earth do they affect one another, right? How does a non-physical mind affect the body? How does my desire to take a sip of coffee cause me to reach out and, physically act in the world and pick up the coffee cup and take a sip from it? How does the physical, interactions of the coffee molecules in my taste buds cause a private, subjective experience of the taste of coffee? Um, if these are two different substances, we have a problem, and that's explaining how they interact. So this is sometimes called, well, Crumley calls it the problem of causal interaction, but generally it's known as the mind-body interaction problem. And this problem was raised by Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, who's pictured here. Um, she read Descartes' meditations and corresponded with him, trying to get to the bottom of this interaction problem. Um, Not on this theory, Pernille, no. The soul is the mind. Yeah. I mean, philosophers probably right up until at least through at least up until the 18th century, and maybe a little bit further beyond that into the 19th, simply thought of the mind and the soul as the same thing. There was no difference. The soul is what enabled us to think, feel, act. It's why we have free will, a sense of morality, right? Same thing, just the mind. In fact, the root of the word psychology, the study of the mind, although it doesn't always seem like that's what psychologists are doing, on account of the influence of behaviorism. But um, that psych from psyche comes from psyche, which just means soul. So it's not really that one is that it's a conduit between one and the other. Yeah, that's dualism as well. That's a kind of dualism. Well, maybe in Hindu philosophy, but we're talking about Descartes. And I'm not really an expert in um, Eastern philosophy, so I don't want to say anything wrong. You know what I mean? Um, but we're looking at Descartes' dualism specifically. So um, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia comes along and asks Descartes, kind of in a series of letters back and forth, how can a non-physical substance like the mind affect physical bodies? And how can the physical affect the mental? Descartes thought it took place via an organ in the brain called the pineal gland, which we now know has probably nothing to do with this, right? The pineal gland is actually a part of our endocrine system. But Descartes thought that, okay, that's where it happened. But he didn't explain how. I mean, he kind of explains everything except the part that really needs explaining. Descartes thought, for example, that the soul could affect what he called animal spirits via the pineal gland. These animal spirits are a bit like a fluid that flows throughout the body, um, and this is how we move. Right? We can move the muscles in our arm, for example, and I can, wave at you. Um, because the soul is affecting the pineal gland in such a way that it's moving the animal spirits, almost like hydraulic fluid through the body, so that I can wave at you. Likewise, if I sense something, maybe you pour drops of water on my hand, and that affects the animal spirits such that it carries the information to my pineal gland, which then affects the soul. But the fundamental problem remains is how does a non-physical mind or soul affect the physical and vice versa? And this is how Princess Elizabeth put it. She said, "Excuse my stupidity in being able to comprehend from what you had previously said concerning weight, the idea by which we should judge how the soul, non-extended and immaterial, can move the body, nor why this power ought to persuade us that the body can be pushed by something immaterial any more than the demonstration of a contrary truth, as you promise in your physics, confirms in us the opinion of its impossibility. And further on, how the mind of a human being, she asked, how the mind of a human being only a thinking substance, can determine the bodily spirits, those are the animal spirits, in producing bodily actions. For it appears that all determination of movement is produced by the pushing of the thing being moved, by the manner in which it is pushed by that which moves it, or else by the qualification and figure of the surface of the latter. She's saying basically that if something physical is being moved, it's got to be done. The moving is done by something physical. Contact is required for the first two conditions and extension for the third, but you entirely exclude the latter from the notion you have of the soul, and the former seems incompatible with an immaterial thing. So basically, Elizabeth is saying, look, the way this looks to me is that if a physical thing is going to be affected, it's got to be by another physical thing. But you deny that the soul has those properties or those characteristics. The soul is immaterial, it's non-physical. How can it affect the physical? This is the mind-body interaction problem. What do you think? I agree with Princess Elizabeth. This is a problem that Descartes' theory, well, there have been a lot of attempts to address this problem. Um, this is still a problem today when it comes to, for example, understanding subjective consciousness. We're still confronted with the mind-body problem, but also philosophers who lived and worked around the same time as Descartes were trying to sort this problem out. Princess Elizabeth, for example, Spinoza and Leibniz try and solve it with a sort of substance monism. Leibniz, everything is monads, and nothing really interacts because it's all pre-established harmony. For Spinoza, there's only one substance, God or nature, and it has infinite attributes, two of which are thought and extension, and each of us is like a little um, expression of that, a mode, a finite mode that has the attribute of thought and extension. Um, so those are various ways that it's been solved. But getting back to the crux of the issue, do you think that this is a problem, like Princess Elizabeth did? Or perhaps you take it as just a brute fact that that this is how it works. Galen says, I think his ideas are deeply flawed, given he can't explain it. So I side with the princess, but I'm very sleepy all the time. Maybe. But okay, but there it is. Like if you are sleepy all the time and there's a physical cause. So yeah, I see why you choose Princess Elizabeth. Now Descartes thought again, and his correspondence with Princess Elizabeth is worth reading. I think at the very least, the bits that deal with uh, the mind-body interaction problem, um, because Descartes tries to reassure her simply by saying, "Oh, this is just the way it works. It's a brute fact. I just take it as a given that the soul affects the body in the way it does, and vice versa, via the pineal gland." Not a satisfactory explanation. Okay, so dualism. We left off with substance dualism. That's what we were just talking about. But remember, there's also property dualism. So here there's one substance, physical stuff, physical substance, but some physical substance. when it's arranged properly, can have not only physical properties, but mental properties. Now, what we're going to do now is look at varieties of physicalism. Now, physicalism is a metaphysical view that says that everything that exists is physical. That doesn't mean material, remember. Um, I think we discussed this in some detail last time, but the reason why we don't say materialism um, is because there are more things than just matter, right? We used to, in Descartes' day, for example, we understood the world, uh, except for the mind, if you're Descartes, but everything else, bodies, not just human bodies, but objects in the world and what they're made of. We understood all of that as matter in motion, um, matter that moves according to these sort of law-like regularities, what we would call the laws of nature today. Uh, there wasn't really any talk of, at least not yet, although there would be soon, of things like magnetic fields, electric fields, gravitational fields. All of these are different kinds of force fields. Um, we hadn't really we hadn't really nailed down concepts like mass, right? Um, Physical properties like that. So now we understand that there's more than just matter moving around, right? There's certain physical properties. There are things like force fields of certain kinds, and these are not made of matter, but they are physical in that they're natural. They're the kinds of things that a physicist would study. So, physicalism, what it says is that the only stuff that exists is the sort of stuff that would be studied by physics and that which kind of, gets built on top of it. So, chemistry, biology, etc. So, everything is ultimately physical. Um, and there are different varieties of physicalism. There's an extreme view, which we could call eliminativism, and it says that mental talk of beliefs and desires and so forth, doesn't refer to anything real. That's a bit of an extreme view, but a lot of physicalists think that mental talking of beliefs, desires, etc., those terms do refer to something real. So we can draw a distinction between reductive and non-reductive physicalists, and also between, um, I guess, what we'll call mental realists and eliminativists. So let's start with reductive physicalism. On reductive physicalism, the mind is the brain. That's it. Mental states are just brain states. So if, for example, I am in pain, I've stubbed my toe or something, my mental state, being in pain, is really just a brain state. Maybe my C fibers are firing, right? That's a type of neuron that fires when we experience like physical damage and when we feel pain. Maybe I am hungry. Maybe I feel the sensation of hunger and form the perceptual belief that I'm hungry. That's just a brain state. My mental state is identical to a type of brain state. My desire to make a sandwich to satisfy my hunger. I can talk about it mentalistically, but ultimately what it is just a type of brain state that I'm in. And this kind of reductive physicalism is called type identity theory because we identify types of mental states with types of brain states. You understand? Pretty straightforward, right? Maybe we can try and come up with some other example brain states or mental states. So I mean, really, the list is exhaustive. Khalid asks, does the theory have an explanation for why a brain state would be associated with a specific feeling? Like, how does it account for subjectivity? Well, it just reduces those mental states to those brain states. So I can see, you know, why some might find that a little bit lacking. But we can imagine an answer something like the following, right? Like if I'm in pain, um, that's because um, I'm in the appropriate brain state. So the neurons that are firing or the patterns of activity, whatever, those are just the type of brain state that causes one to, or that one has when one is in pain. And you have a different type of brain state when you're hungry. Maybe you have, I don't know, this is a very simple example, but hunger neurons, right? And those are the ones that fire when you're hungry. Maybe you have itch neurons, and those are the ones that fire when you have an itch, not when you're in pain or when you're hungry, right? So maybe the reason why on this theory that specific feelings are associated with specific brain states is because that's the job of those neurons. Because we know that parts of the brain seem to be specialized for certain things. Maybe that's what's going on here. Yes, yes, it's still subjective. But remember, this is a reductive theory. So that's why you might find this a little unsatisfactory. But on this theory, we have two ways of talking about the same thing. So we have our everyday sort of common sense way of talking about the mental, our our folk psychology. We can we can talk about beliefs and desires, or we can use a more neuroscientific vernacular. I can talk about different groups of neurons, different kinds of neurons firing, different parts of the brain, right? I could talk about everything that I can talk about mentalistically in the language of neuroscience, and I wouldn't lose anything. Um, this is why it's reductive, right? We're reducing our mentalistic talk um, to talk about the brain. But when we do that, when we make that reduction, we don't actually lose any explanatory power. It's just a different way of talking about the same thing. Pretty interesting. I don't know. What do we think about identity theory, type identity theory? I mean, I appreciate that some of you are concerned about what happens to to subjectivity here. But here's the thing. Um, no philosophical theory of the mental really deals with this very well. Um, so I have bad news. The upcoming theories aren't going to do any better or worse than identity theory does. Unfortunately. Unfortunately, explaining subjective consciousness is well to put it in similar terms as Daniel Dennett did, um, explaining subjective consciousness is like one of the last surviving mysteries. I think it's up there with, understanding the origins of the universe or the question of whether we're alone in the universe. These are kind of mysterious questions, right? How does subjective consciousness work? Just as mysterious as those questions, which is not to say that we won't have an answer one day. but we currently don't have an answer. And what you're all getting at here is actually it's very interesting. It's called the problem of subjectivity, and it's related to the mind-body problem, right? No matter what particular theory of the mental you pick, whether it's type identity theory, some kind of token identity theory, functionalism, you've got a problem of explaining why um, neural activity results in this subjective first-person experience of something. Remember Leibniz's mill that we talked about last week? Who remembers Leibniz's mill? Who wants to give me a little recap of Leibniz's mill? Well, Khalid, this theory simply says that what we refer to with our sort of everyday common sense talk of the mental, beliefs, desires, pains, pleasures, etc., what those ultimately are just brain states. That's all it's saying. So if I'm in pain, that's a type of mental state, which is identical with a type of brain state. Uh, like if I stubbed my toe and I said, ouch, and you looked at my brain in some kind of advanced brain scanner, you'd see a particular sort of activity. And then if I stubbed my toe again the next day and you looked at it again, you'd see the same type of activity because being in pain just is that brain state. Could subjective consciousness be the work of the soul? Well, that's what some people believe. Um, some people believe that, but it depends what you think the soul is, right? Descartes would say, sure, yeah, it's the soul in the sense that it's the mind, which is a thinking substance. Um, but a functionalist might say something different, right? Here we go. Thank you, Maddie. Leibniz's mill. Yeah, you shrink yourself down and walk inside a brain like it is a mill. You see the physical things happening, but you wouldn't see thoughts, perceptions, memories. They don't seem like physical things. Exactly. And that's the problem, right? I look at a red apple and I have this subjective experience of redness. Okay, well, you scan my brain or you shrink yourself down and walk around inside of it, you just see neurons firing. You don't see redness in there, right? So that is related, or I think Leibniz's mill kind of highlights part of this problem of explaining how subjective consciousness works. And of course, it's all related to the mind-body problem after all, because brains are a part of our bodies. Okay, so what kind of evidence do identity theorists typically invoke? Well, for a long time, we've known that damage to certain parts of the brain will produce specific deficits in your perception or your cognition. So, for example, are there any psychology students in the room? In the room. We're not in a room. Any psychologists out there on the internet today? Natalie and Maddie, yes. All right. Kathleen, yes. Okay. Oh, a lot of you. Ryan, Alina, nice. So, have your professors talked about Phineas Gage yet? Yes, perfect. Phineas Gage is one of those literally a textbook example of this, right? He was a railway foreman. Yeah, he had the rod go through his brain. That's right. So, for those of you who aren't too familiar, he was a foreman on like laying the railway across America, back in the 19th century. And they would have to blast, with explosives, to blast through the rock to clear a way for laying down the railway track. And they did this by, after the hole was drilled and the explosives were in, you tamp it down with a big long pole called a tamping iron. And what happened with Phineas Gage is that the explosives went off when he was doing this, and this tamping iron uh, basically became a missile, and it shot through his skull, kind of like up here and out here, and it really messed up, frontal areas of his brain, like his orbital frontal cortex, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and this resulted in a change in his personality. So, yes, he survived, but his personality was altered. So, Phineas Gage is that, intro to psych example uh, of this, right? Or perhaps you have a relative or somebody who's had a stroke, right? Now, depending on what part of the brain the stroke occurs in, um, there are going to be certain effects that you'll be able to observe, right? So people get strokes in their language areas, but where exactly they get them determines what kind of deficits we might observe. Broca's aphasia versus Wernicke's aphasia, for example. You might have a stroke in your motor areas that could affect your movement. Um, but the idea is that damage to different parts of the brain tends to produce um, certain kinds of deficits, so that we know that certain parts of the brain seem to be implicated in certain cognitive and perceptual processes. So that's the evidence we have on the scientific side of things. But what about on the philosophical side? Well, one kind of reason, we'll call it, you might want to adopt um, reductive physicalism is that it's a simpler ontology. So think back to Occam's razor, right? Do not multiply entities beyond necessity. A world that is only physical is ontologically simpler than a world where there are two kinds of substances. One substance is simpler than two kinds of substance. So that's one philosophical reason. Another is that as science continues to explain more about the world, the physical world, um, you know, um, we learn more and more and more as we go, right? But if dualism were true, then science wouldn't be able to tell us anything about the mental because the mental is non-physical and science studies physical things. Now, science is so successful that maybe it's reasonable to just believe in physicalism because there's no scientific evidence for dualism. How could there be? There couldn't be, even if dualism were true, because the mind would be non-physical, and science cannot study something that's non-physical. So those are reasons why you might want to adopt reductive physicalism, like identity theory, like type identity theory. How could a dualist respond to this? Well, identity claims are pretty strong claims, but we can falsify them by simply showing that there's a difference between the things that we identify as a single thing. So if we could show that there's something special that applies to minds but not to bodies or brains, then we could falsify type identity theory. So maybe one candidate for this is intentionality. Maybe we can say that mental states have intentionality, but brain states don't. Well, maybe. I think we can actually say that brain states have intentionality. They have that aboutness to them. But phenomenology? I don't know. That one might be more tricky. But even if phenomenology is mysterious now, we can't explain how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience. That doesn't mean that one day we won't be able to explain how subjective experience comes to happen, in physical terms. So that's reductive physicalism. How are we doing for time? Oh, not bad. Any questions so far? Okay. Now, let's talk about non-reductive physicalism. So type identity theory, which is our reductive physicalism that we're looking at here, our reductive physicalist theory, seems to limit mental states to human beings. Why is that? Can you tell me why? It's in the textbook, which I'm sure you're all reading. I hope. I hope you're all reading it. Yeah, Khalid, basically that's kind of well, it's not really assuming all creatures have a similar brain structure, but the brain is the key. Um, so remember, type identity theory says that being in pain, for example, is reducible to having the right type of brain state, maybe C fibers firing, right? That would imply that, like, when I'm in pain and when you're in pain, Khalid, we each have an identical type of brain state, which is a bit weird, but bear with me. Now, um, imagine a non-human animal, like a chicken. Chickens can surely be in pain, um, but they have very different brains than we do. And so a chicken could not have the same type of brain state that we have when we're in pain, which seems to rule out the possibility of the chicken experiencing pain. That's the problem. Um, Type identity theory identifies mental states with particular types of human brain states, but we don't want to deny that there are other creatures that could have mental states. Yes, exactly. So I think it's uncontroversial to claim that non-human animals have mental states. And we also wouldn't want to rule out the possibility of, say, some kind of extraterrestrial life that was sufficiently sophisticated having mental states, or even, really advanced computers or robots could perhaps have mental states. Um, so, the idea here is that we can't reduce types of mental states to types of brain states. This is something called the multiple realizability objection to type identity theory. And this is the idea that mental states can be realized by lots of different kinds of brain states, and perhaps lots of different kinds of states within other physical substrates. The multiple realizability objection leads to something called functionalism. Most physicalists these days are some type of functionalist, not a type identity theorist. What is functionalism? Well, functionalism says that mental states are defined in terms of their functional roles, not the physical substrate in which they're implemented. It also says that mental states or minds in general are multiply realizable. So, um, just to kind of clarify this notion of multiple realizability, well, let's come up with some examples. What what is a calculator? This is the example that I like to use. When's the last time you guys used a calculator? Maybe your high school math class, or maybe a science class, or maybe you're just doing your weekly budget. 2 hours ago. Yeah, yesterday, today, 12th grade, this morning. Yeah. What kind of calculator did you use? Scientific calculator. Sick. The phone. Okay. This is great. Sharp right view. I don't know what that is. Is that a software program? Scientific calculator? Okay, nice. A fancy scientific one. Sick. I had the Texas Instruments one, if I'm not mistaken. I think it still works, but it needs batteries. That's right. I have my own scientific calculator. Um, anyway, so what is it that makes a calculator a calculator? Well, it's not exactly what it's made of, right? Like a few of you, oh, this table keeps moving around on me. It's very annoying. So a few of you use scientific calculators, which are, let's call them, let's call those like hardware calculators or physical calculators, right? They have circuit boards, um, and maybe there's some software, right? But it's like circuit boards, microchips, batteries, wires. It's that. That's what your calculator is. Right. So, Hyla, what makes it a calculator, though, is not what it's made of, but the fact that it calculates, right? So, those of you who are using your phone, right? I'll pull my calculator app up here. This is probably the one I use most often, right? You know, that little calculator you've got on your smartphone. That's a software calculator. That's a calculator that's being implemented. Like with a scientific calculator, the calculator is the computer, or the computer in question is a calculator. But here, it's a calculator being run on a phone, virtually, in software. Yeah, exactly. So Hyla and Khalid are right. It's the function that makes a calculator what it is, not what it's made of. And there are lots of other examples of calculators. We could keep going. We could talk about the abacus, right? The abacus is very different from the calculator on your smartphone or your scientific calculator, but it's still a calculator, right? Um, so these are all calculators, but they're all made of very different things. That's multiple realizability. There are various physical substrates within which we can realize or implement a calculator. Hardware, software, um, beads on uh, I don't know what to call them, little rows of beads that we move around as we do with the abacus. Um, so that's multiple realizability. And yeah, like you guys said in the chat, what makes it what it is its function, not what it's made of. So can we think of some examples of mental states defined in terms of functional roles? Let's start with pain. The functional role of pain might be to represent, I don't know, tissue damage. Um, so there are certain pain inputs, like tissue damage, um, certain things that happen within us, like our C fibers firing, and then certain outputs, certain pain behaviors, like saying, ouch. That's how we define pain. Inputs, computation, outputs. It's different for itch, right? For itch, like maybe I get a mosquito bite and it causes an itchy sensation. Um, well, the inputs, the intervening states, and the outputs are different for itches than they are for pains. That's what it means to say we define mental states in terms of functional roles. Yeah, and this is a good one. Hunger to make you eat. Yeah. Like if you feel your stomach rumbling, uh, you know what that means, right? Um, and there are certain inputs, like an empty stomach is maybe your input. The output is the behavior, making a sandwich. Yeah, same with fear, right? Fear. So emotions, this is a good one because it highlights emotions can be emotions are mental states too. I think they're also body states, but fear. Fear, maybe the input is a dangerous stimulus of some kind, like a bear charging at you, and the output is, running away or playing dead, right? The computation is not just the neurons firing, though. So that's a good question to highlight. The it's not just the neurons firing because it could be something else. That's how it's implemented or realized in us. But we could have a robot and maybe we could give it like a fear program or a pain program and make it behave the same way if it sees a bear or stubs its toe, right? Make it fear the bear or say, "Ouch, I have stubbed my toe," if it stubs its toe. Uh, in principle, yes, Khalid, I think a functionalist would say so. In principle, you mean an AI language model, like an LLM? Yeah. Um, in principle, sure. But when it comes, whether we're talking LLMs, robots, computer programs, we're very, 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 very far away from making anything that would be like us, capable of feeling. Because again, we don't exactly know how it all works, right? It's still quite mysterious. But in principle, a functionalist would say, sure. Um, so if you're a functionalist and a physicalist, then you'd probably advocate token identity theory rather than type identity theory. So here what we do is we do not identify mental states with types of brain states, because there are lots of different brain states that could realize any particular mental state. Our brains are not identical, but you and I can all experience pain. We can't be realizing the same type of brain state because our brains are different from one another. Likewise, non-human animals can experience pain. I think that's uncontroversial now. Um, but they have different brains than we do. So they can't be instantiating the same type of brain state as a human does when a human is in pain because they have different brains. So what they do instead is we all instantiate tokens of the same type. So let's try and come up with an example to illustrate this. Tokens versus types. So, what's a type of car? I need a type of car. I don't know about cars. Somebody should tell me what's a type of car. What do we got here in the chat? Honda Civic. Okay, a ZR1. I don't know what a ZR1 is, but it sounds pretty cool. An SUV. Well, yeah, but I'm looking for like a particular type of car, like a make and model. A Toyota. Yes. The Beetle. Let's go with a Volkswagen Beetle. Oh, it's one of those Corvettes. Okay. All right, let's go with the Corvette. So so Corvette is a type of car. Um so let's say I have a Corvette. And you have a Corvette, and you have we're Oprah right now. You get a car, you get a car, you get a car. Everyone gets a car, right? Um, Now we all have the same type of car, sure, but each of our cars is a token of that type. So maybe my Corvette is black, and yours is red, um, and yours is purple. I don't know, right? Mine is parked in the garage. Yours is speeding down the highway. We all have the same type of car, but what we actually possess are tokens of that type. That's the idea here with mental states on token identity theory. So when I'm in a pain, when I'm in a state of pain, I have, my C fibers are firing. When you're in pain, your C fibers are firing. But we don't have the same type of brain state. We each have a token of that type of brain state. Maybe an octopus is in pain somewhere down in the ocean, but it doesn't have C fibers. Its O fibers are firing instead. And that's how pain is realized in the octopus. In that case, that is a token of a type. Um, yeah. Yeah, I mean, what type physicalism implies is that we would all have the exact same brain state if we're in pain, which is absurd, right? Everybody's a little different, and animals are a little different, and maybe artificial minds too. So, so all the change here from type identity theory to token identity theory is just that on token identity theory, we identify particular mental states with tokens of types of mental states, not types of mental states. Does that make sense? I mean, if you want to bring it back to the car example, um, on type identity theory, it would be like if each of us had a Corvette, it would be like saying we all have the same Corvette, which we don't. We all have different Corvettes, right? It'd be like saying my yellow Corvette and your yellow Corvette are the same car. They're not. They're two different cars. They're tokens of that type of car. And that's what token identity theory would say. Now, one interesting consequence of this is that um, machines can be said to think. Now, I'm not making a claim, anything like machines are capable of feeling pain and joy and love and having subjective conscious experiences. No. Um, but at least not yet. But machines can be said to have mental states. In fact, all of this was developed, this non-reductive physicalism, functionalism, was developed by a mathematician and philosopher, uh, Hilary Putnam. He developed this by drawing on the ideas of Alan Turing, the computer scientist, particularly the notion of a Turing machine. And what Putnam did was liken um, mental states in the mind to the logical states of a Turing machine, and the brain to the physical states of the Turing machine. With the year of manufacturing, nah, it doesn't matter in our, let's say they're all the same year. It's just to show that like there's a type, which is the Corvette, and then there's tokens of that type, which is like the one I drive versus the one you drive. Again, serial number. One of them is mine. It has the serial number it has. The other is yours. It has a different one. They're tokens of a type. Think of type as like, you know what you can do? You can think of a type similarly to a universal, and tokens. to particular instantiations of the universal. Does that help clear it up? Yeah. And I guess models, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really, it doesn't, maybe, I don't see what that does for us though. Like, all I'm trying to do is say that there are types of mental states and then tokens of those types of mental states. So there's a mental state of happiness. And on non-reductive physicalism, when I'm happy, that is a token mental state of that type, namely being happy. That's it. That's all I'm trying to say. Okay, how are we doing for time? Ah, here we go. I think it's a shame that Crumley goes right to the Chinese room thought experiment without really explaining Turing machines in too much detail, or the Turing test for that matter. But let's just look at the Chinese room thought experiment as a sort of rebuttal to functionalism. Now, remember, on functionalism, the key is owing to multiple realizability that we could say that computers can have mental states. And the consequence is that we can say that machines can think. Along comes John Searle, who has us imagine the following. Imagine that you're sitting in a room. You don't understand any Chinese, only English. But people outside of the room are passing messages with Chinese characters written on them into the room. The people outside can understand those characters. They're native speakers of like Mandarin, say. And they expect to get messages back from whatever's inside of the room. Now, you're in the room, you don't understand Chinese at all, but you have a rule book which allows you to put together an appropriate response. Um, the book is like a program for a computer. And it's like a series of if-then statements. It says, if you get this string of symbols, then reply with this string of symbols. So you get a message from the outside. It's written in Chinese characters, which you don't understand, but you can match them up to what's in your rule book. Say, okay, I got this, so I should respond with this. So you respond with the appropriate message. The people outside the room getting your messages think, wow, well, whoever's in that room or whatever's in that room understands Chinese characters. Um, but of course, the person in the room doesn't understand Chinese at all. You're just manipulating inputs and outputs according to rules. And what Searle is trying to show is that there can be um, syntactic or rule governed manipulation or computation, manipulation of these symbols or computation, if you want to put it that way, without any real understanding. The idea is that what the person in the room is doing is exactly what a computer is doing. Um, and we wouldn't say the person in the room understands Chinese. And if we agree with that, then we should also agree the computers don't understand and are therefore not intelligent. And therefore, whatever they're doing is not thinking. That is the what the Chinese room is supposed to illustrate. Any questions about the Chinese room thought experiment? Wish this table would stop moving. You kind of have to imagine yourself in the room, or actually, there's quite a good video about this on YouTube, which maybe I can share to the Discord server later. But do you understand? The uh, the exercise and the point of the exercise. Excellent. Basically, yeah, the long and short of it is you're in the room, you don't know what these symbols mean, but you say, you've got your program, if this, then this. People outside the room are like, wow, this person or computer or whoever's in there understands these Chinese characters. But you don't. You don't. Searle says further that in systems like this, like in digital computers, the meaning, the semantics, is parasitic to the syntax, the symbols, which is not like it is for us. Um, we understand things. Searle is saying the computer doesn't understand things. We put the understanding there. We decide what the symbols mean, right? For the computer to really understand, I suppose the meanings of the symbols would have to be intrinsic to those symbols, not parasitic upon it. So, um, the idea is the person in the room has no understanding of Chinese, even though she seems to be successfully communicating with people outside of the room. And again, that's what Searle thinks is going on with computers. They don't understand. They don't have intelligence. They don't think. They don't have mental states because they're just like the person in the room. Yes, exactly. Well, there is intentionality, but we put it there. The computer programmer puts it there, right? The symbols do mean something. They are about something. And again, like I don't know, I don't buy this argument personally. Um, but I don't want to get into the weeds. Um, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly, Yusuf. Like a computer only knows how to do what we program it to do. Um, no. Okay, so Turing did not think that any computer passed the Turing test in 1950 when he wrote his paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. Um, then again, Turing's kind of ambiguous about what he seems to think the test is supposed to actually be for. And this would be like if anyone is still scrambling for an essay topic, this would be a pretty good one. Although be warned, this is also my this is my thing. Um, this is what I do. This stuff, right? So if you write about the Turing test, I'm going to be very interested, but I'm also going to be maybe a little bit more critical. Um, but at certain points, not just in computing machinery and intelligence, but in other publications and interviews, Turing talks about the test as if it's an empirical test, like a test we would actually subject a computer to. And in other places, he talks about it like it's a thought experiment, like whether it's conceivable that a computer suitably programmed could have hold a convincing sort of human-like conversation with a human being. Um, so he's kind of ambiguous about it. And honestly, I think you can use it both ways. I don't really think that there's much utility there when it comes to the Turing test as an actual empirical test. Um, and I'm happy to talk about that in the Discord server. Um, I think it's more useful as a thought experiment, and I think it's actually especially useful if we flip it and we do something where we actually use Turing test like scenarios in order to try and get to the bottom of what it is about people that makes us attribute mentality to machines. That's what I argued in my PhD thesis at any rate. But I won't bore you with that. But yeah, the intentionality, like Khalid says, this is what Searle would say, is that, when he says that the semantics is parasitic rather than intrinsic, what he's saying is that we decide what these symbols mean. The symbols mean something to us, but not to the computer program. The computer program is operating only on syntax. It's just like a mechanical process. And it works by virtue of the formal structure of the language that it's using, like logic, basically. Computers are like logic machines. They don't know what the symbols mean. They don't need to know. It's a form. Logic is a formal system, a functional system. If you physically implement a logical language, you've got a functionalist sort of mind. But here's maybe a problem with functionalism, right? I don't buy the argument, but you might. Another issue with functionalism, and I think some of you were getting at this earlier, was that functionalism does not really do a good job of explaining subjectivity or qualia. Um, and this is where Ned Block's China brain comes in. For some reason, I guess everybody likes to use Chinese language or the population of China in their thought experiments for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. But Ned Block has us imagine the entire population of China, over 1 billion people. So maybe that's why. You could just imagine the world. It could be a world brain. There's more people on the world than there are in China. This is true. But imagine we connect everybody together as if everybody was like an individual neuron, and we're all connected together, similar to how the neurons in the brain are connected together. And you can imagine further that brain is connected to a body. The population could be functionally organized like a brain, but a lot of people think it would be weird to say that all of the people feel pain if we, you know, whacked the body on its toe. And, all of the people who are playing the role of neurons do whatever the neurons do. It would be weird to say that they're in pain. Then again, I don't really buy this. Um, because people are not neurons. Uh, the inverted spectrum, now that's on the other hand is a little trickier. What is the inverted spectrum? You've probably heard about this actually. What if it were the case that our visual spectrums were flipped? So where I see red, you see green. And where you see green, I see red, right? We could both see a red object, and we use the words consistently, right? So I look at a red apple and I go, there's a red apple. And you look at the apple, and your subjective experience of it is of my green, which you call red. So you go, oh, yeah, that is a red apple. We would have different inner phenomenal experiences of the apple, and we would have no way of knowing it because we use the words consistently, right? I have one inner experience, you have another, but we both call it red. Yeah. It's related to the problem of subjectivity, but here, um, it's related to functionalism because it highlights that functionalism doesn't really do anything about qualia, right? Um, you can even kind of take a step back and think about how, we can talk about functional roles and behaviors. There's inputs, computation, and outputs, etc. But why is there anything that it's like at all? right? Um, so like multiverse where there are multiple Earths with same likeness but different. I don't really understand. This is not about like multiverse. This is about different experiences, right? I mean, I guess the takeaway is this, like we could be functionally organized exactly the same, but I might see red as red and you might see red as what I see as green. We'd have no way of knowing. But we'd all also like it doesn't explain why things appear the way they appear. Functionalism just does not touch qualia. I still don't follow. This is not about timelines or worlds. This is about subjectivity, right? Like, I guess, Yusuf. I mean, again, I can't emphasize enough. The key takeaway is that functionalism just does not say anything about qualia. So the inverted spectrum scenario might be true, and we'd have no way of knowing. And we'd also, I think more importantly, have no way of explaining the difference, even if we did know that there was a difference. No, because we couldn't tell. Think about it. Think about it. We couldn't tell. Like we wouldn't be able to tell if we all had, and if half of us had one spectrum and the others half had an inverted spectrum, how would we tell? Yes, there is an explanatory gap when it comes to qualia, at least on functionalism. Exactly right. But continue thinking about the inverted spectrum, and I'll try and find some additional materials on the Chinese room, the Turing test, and the inverted spectrum, and I'll share those on the Discord server because I think this stuff is really fun to think about. Now we're not quite finished. Um, there's an explanatory gap on functionalism. An explanatory gap means we don't explain something. Functionalism does not explain qualia. Yeah, we still have to talk about eliminative materialism, but I think I'm going to leave it here for today because we are finished in about 2 minutes. So we'll pick that up next time. We'll talk about eliminative materialism very quickly, and then we'll move on to talk about personal identity and the self. So you want to make sure you've read through the first half, roughly, of the chapter on personal identity in our textbook. And stay tuned on the Discord server. I'm going to find some fun stuff to try and clarify this tonight. Um, okay, so I guess that's it for today. And remember, I know the due date for the essay is coming up. If you haven't read my instructions, you better read them. Yes, what's your question, Finn? I can answer questions briefly, but I do have to go. Um, he had the question if life events are explained episodically or narratively. Oh, well, I think the answer is going to depend on who you ask. Um, theories of self. There are theories of self, for example, that emphasize narrativity. Um, then again, we know that we can recall things episodically, so we have episodic memory. But over time, our memories are semanticized, so that we lose a lot of the sort of episodic quality and retain just the semantic or like narrative portion. This is something that really think I should probably talk more about on the Discord server. But it's a good question. Okay. Um, what kind of sources? Ah, guys, this has been explained. I mean, when I get these questions, it suggests to me that my lecture has gone unwatched, the instructions have gone unread. This has all been answered. There should be no reason to be asking me this point. So go watch that lecture. Go read the instructions. You hand in your proof of work in the Dropbox. Just save a couple drafts, that clearly indicate the progress you've made from your starting to get to your final draft. You don't even have to put them all into a zip file or anything. You can just grab them all, throw them in the Dropbox. Just make sure they're clearly labeled. Okay, I have to go. I have another class to get to. Um, I will see you all on Thursday. Okay? And for those of you who haven't, you gotta read the instructions. Okay? You gotta read the instructions. Okay. All right. See you all later.